Hi, welcome back to the 50/50 Project, where each week I talk about one thing I've learned for each year I have lived. As I sit down to record today, the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra and a choir are kicking off an outdoor concert just down the street. So if there's a little bit of a soundtrack for this episode, that's what you're hearing. I think we could do much worse. This week, we're moving into a category I just call happiness, which is actually something I really have to work at. I'm not a naturally sunny personality, and somewhere in my late 30s maybe, I started to think about happiness differently. I moved from a concept of it as this uncontrollable, fated thing that would either come to me or not, and I moved into a realization that, for me at least, happiness is going to have to be a product of work and intention and some choice making. Now, I don't want to overstate this. If there's a fail-proof program of behavior that is guaranteed to make you all happy all the time, I certainly have not found it. I'm still a fairly grumpy, glum human as it goes, but over the years I have found some ways to make myself a little less so, at least some of the time. And the happiness category will lay a few of those out. So let's get happy, or at least happier, with thing number 4. Stay open to awe. I get that this sounds self-evident. I mean, who wants to close themselves off from wonder? And who doesn't want to have experiences that lift us up out of the drudgery of daily life and remind us of the miracle and beauty of life? But for me, this is another situation where it's about seeking to hold a balance really within my own focus. Because, look, the world is a dark place. It's full of terrible people doing some really terrible shit, and it's full of unspeakable horror and extraordinary injustice and cruel accidents that come for the best people you know at the worst possible times. There are wars and there are famines and water pollution and bridge collapses in this life. This is all undeniably true. And all you have to do is just look around to confirm all of that. But this world is also a beautiful place, and it's full of heroic people doing superhuman acts of service. It's full of deep compassion and extreme generosity and sudden wonders that just open themselves up right before our undeserving eyes. There are cancer research scientists working overtime right now, and rescuers in boats pulling people from floodwaters, and baby animals, and improbably perfect pink cherry blossoms that spring to life every year just over in the White River State Park. All of this is also undeniably true, and all you have to do is look around to confirm that stuff too. Of course, only half of that gets magnified by the news coverage every night, so it can be easy to forget about wonder and beauty and transcendence, and therefore to stop looking for it, and therefore to stop seeking it and being receptive to it in the world around us. For a long time, I've been in the process of learning that it's important to stay open to awe. But I recently had a really profound experience that gave me an intense and probably much needed sort of refresher crash course on all of this. And I want to tell you about it today. About 3 weeks ago, Indianapolis happened to be in the path of totality for a solar eclipse. I've been acutely aware of this eclipse since the day I moved here 8 months ago. It has been endlessly on the news and on the social media feeds of all kinds of local museums and organizations. This was a really big deal for a really long time for Indianapolis. Friends and I have joked about the intensity and, relentlessness of the media coverage. And when the city started a countdown clock 100 days out, we all felt like that was a little much. In the run-up, I read Joan Didion's famous eclipse essay and kind of rolled my eyes and stopped halfway through reading. I really resisted the excitement bubbling up around me about this. See, I had been in Atlanta during a partial eclipse a few years ago. 2017, 2016, I can't recall the exact date now, but it hasn't been very long. And it was fine. With eclipse glasses, you could see the disk of the moon encroaching into that big ball of fire, and it was pretty cool. And without them, you could still see a perceptible change in the quality of light. It was interesting enough. But in the end, that 90 or 95% eclipse sort of stopped there. It was intellectually intriguing, I guess. But it didn't really make me feel anything. So fast forward to my arrival in Indy and this sudden immersion into eclipse madness, and I just couldn't get into it. There was a little bit of been there, done that, was slightly underwhelmed to the whole thing. I did order some glasses pretty early in the fall because I had struggled to find them the last time around. And a month before go time, I decided to set a reminder on my cell phone to buzz me 20 minutes before totality. So I had general plans to go outside and look up. But honestly, I wasn't expecting much. I was actually more attuned, really, to all the dire predictions of apocalyptic traffic they were predicting in and around the city. I kept thinking that as you get older, you realize that very little in life lives up to the hype. When that day arrived, there were thousands and thousands of people who were taking tremendous pains to get to the path of totality, people driving hours to find a great place to watch, getting up early to make sure they didn't miss out. I think they said at one point that every hotel room in the city was sold out. I, on the other hand, just had to walk across the street to the courtyard at the federal courthouse, which was supposed to be one of the best viewing spots in the city, and it did turn out to be that. But when my reminder buzzed on my phone that day, I was in the middle of reading something and I was really absorbed, and there was a brief pause in which I wondered if it was even worth making the minimal effort to ride the elevator down and step outside. But I did. And thank God I did. And I think I mean that literally. I feel so deeply grateful that I made that scant little effort, and far more so that I just happened to be here in this city in that moment where this extraordinary thing just happened to happen to me. Because it's not something that I would have traveled to see, probably not even for an hour. Because in my mind, I had already seen a 95% eclipse. But I learned that day that the difference between a 95% eclipse and totality it's everything. It's incomparable. If you ever get a chance to see a total eclipse, take it. Even if it means some travel, even if it means some sacrifice, make it happen. It's worth it. This turned out to be one of the most astonishing, moving, awe-inspiring things I have ever seen in my entire life. And now I understand why people spend their vacation days chasing these things across the calendar and around the globe. It's difficult to explain exactly what I saw that day. I can say for sure that the light went all silvery before it disappeared, and it seemed in the moment like it triggered 100 street lamps. It was a very eerie experience. I also remember that the temperature dropped and the birds got quiet, and I did notice that the traffic was completely non-existent in that moment, and the people around me were all pretty silent too. And then the moon moved into the position of totality, and the world went completely dark through my eclipse lenses. But after that, after I and all of the people standing around me ripped those glasses off in the same exact second, it becomes really hard to translate into language what happened, because everybody there seemed to experience something uncontrollable and unnameable, pre-linguistic almost, and profoundly emotional. Some of the people around me screamed. A woman behind me started sobbing. And several of us swore instinctively. I myself could not stop whispering, "Holy shit," to myself over and over for at least the first 30 seconds of totality. And then I found myself repeating a Tom Hanks line from a really stupid movie called Joe versus the Volcano, of all things. In the film, Joe is lost at sea on a rickety raft. He's dehydrated, he's delusional, he's starting to drowse off. And then he's roused by a spectacular moonrise over the immensity of the open ocean. "Dear God, whose name I do not know," he says, "thank you for my life." And I don't know why, but that line has always stuck with me. And I don't know why, but in that moment, when our comparatively tiny moon aligned through a million variables of time and space and distance for an impossibly perfect fit over a sun that is orders of magnitude larger, that's what I said too. "Dear God, whose name I do not know, thank you for my life." Which is to say, thank you for this experience. Thank you for this moment and for my presence in it. Thank you for piloting me here to the very epicenter of wonder, even though I was barely willing to push an elevator button and cross the street to get here. It was beautiful and big and undeserved, and I like to think that it changed some small part of me forever, maybe. Of course, since then, I've talked to several friends about their experiences in that moment, and everyone sort of agrees that we felt infinite and expansive and eternal, but also simultaneously tiny and insignificant and adrift somehow. I felt vibrantly, almost violently alive, and I felt the borders in my own mind around what is or isn't possible sort of rolling back on themselves somehow. For 3 minutes and 18 seconds, we all stood and looked and had nary a thought about scrolling through our phones for once. For that window, an awareness of the universe itself was really all that we could grapple with. And then it was over, and the moon moved on, and the light came back to the city. But there was still magic in the way people registered each other. On the portico of that courthouse building, on the sidewalks, on the steps leading back up to my apartment, strangers and near strangers were talking. I live in a building full of civil but quiet people. We have all become so yoked to our phones that we don't have the bandwidth for the accidental interactions that brush up against us beyond those screens. I think people chit-chat less. I think people rarely speak in hallways and on buses now. And it's not because we're horrible, rude, ruined people. I think it's because we're almost always already engaged in a digital conversation that never ends. But on that day, and for a few days after, people were really looking at each other instead of the screens. They were talking in elevators. They were talking in the lobby. "Did you see the eclipse? Wasn't that amazing?" Can you imagine how terrifying that would be for people 500 years ago who were unprepared and unaware? And even when I finished these conversations and returned to my quiet haven of an apartment, I feel like I was more aware of even the people passing on the streets below my window. I felt more attuned to other minds that had probably just been blown in exactly the same way as mine had. Of course, it's all over now, and it has been for the better part of a month, and I'm afraid the most potent effects of wonder, even wonder that big and that bright, probably have a pretty short half-life. Within a few days, the chatter died out in our lobby, and now, a few weeks out, I still rehash the event with friends I haven't seen since we separately saw it. But soon, that conversational line will play itself out too. And maybe I won't talk about this ever again. And of course, the sun is back up there, just doing its regular thing. And it's so easy to forget that this, too, is a spectacle and a wonder. And yet, I hope that some part of the day has remade me, just a little, for the better and hopefully for good. At the very least, I think it whet my appetite for awe again. I think it has made me seek out more opportunities to see things that might shake me with their beauty or challenge me with their strangeness, I have found myself noting spring flowers with more intention, taking more time to really observe the clouds that swirl outside my windows, looking more closely at the beautiful, remarkable, inimitable faces that I pass, and thinking more consciously about the multitudes that they, just like me, contain. And I even priced a travel package to Iceland, where a total eclipse will occur in 2026. I get it now. I'm a little bit of a convert. And I think it's probably important to seek out awe of both kinds, both the big and the small, and the far and the near. Wonder doesn't have to be as much of a drama queen as it was here on the 8th of April. There's a fairly recent book about all the many forms of awe written by a guy named Dr. Keltner, who is a psychology researcher affiliated with this really cool thing called the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. His book is just called Awe, and the subtitle, I will read it, The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. He wrote the book in the wake of his brother's death as a way for him to work through how wonder can help balance grief and loss and horror, and it's well worth reading in my opinion. He makes the point that the most common sense of awe isn't a huge celestial event like the eclipse or an encounter with some natural wonder like the Grand Canyon or the world's tallest waterfall or whatever. In fact, we access awe most frequently through other people. We find awe most often in each other, in people displaying courage and kindness and strength and goodness. Keltner calls this form of awe moral beauty, and he says we can find it everywhere we can find people. We might see it in firefighters on the evening news, or we might find it in a stranger on the bus who takes his headphones off for 5 minutes so that he can chat with his elderly seatmate. And I think that checks out, even with my experience with the eclipse. A lot of wonder came from above us and beyond us that day, but some of it existed just between us, in those elevator conversations and those shared moments. In the end, awe is all around us and it's within us, and in my experience, life is better when I make the effort to stay open to it. And not to get too heavy here, but I think the capacity to fall into awe and really to fall in love with humanity is one of the few things that may save us now, at a time when it seems that we're really in trouble with and really endangered by our clearly accelerating collective tendency to overlook the wonder of the other, to negate the beauty of those with whom we may disagree, to forget more and more often about the innate dignity that people around us deserve just by virtue of their humanness, and how a lack of immediate understanding, if it's approached the right way, can actually be another portal to wonder and awe. Okay, let's bring it back down to earth with an execution score. Right now, it's a pretty solid 8.5 out of 10. I've been blasted awake by this extraordinary experience and am, at the moment, pretty open to awe. Let's hope I don't doze off again, though I think we all know I will. We all just sort of do, to our own grief and peril. But I'll do my best to hang on to as much of that wonder as I can for as long as I can, and my life will be better for that. All right, that's enough for today. As you go about your business, I hope some awe will find its way to you. Stay open to it if you can. Thanks for spending some time with me today, and I'll be back next week with thing number 5.